Hello and good evening and welcome to Black History Month at Writing on the Wall, the festival that has been continuing some of the key discussions and debates that have been rumbling for a long time, many years, but which have been amplified by the Black Lives Matter protests that characterised our summer. So earlier, we've had some fantastic events so far, people joining us from New York, California, France. Tonight, we're presenting some homegrown talent and homegrown initiatives. And earlier in the month, we had an event which looked at the decolonisation of the curriculum, a key demand put forward by the Black Lives Matter movement. And you could consider this as, if you missed that event, you can catch it on the Facebook page, but you could consider this as part two to that, if you like, because what we're going to be considering is the role of community-based heritage projects in helping to decolonise not only our curricula, but our public spaces and our public awareness. And we're focusing on community and creative heritage, work that's formed a major part of WoW's project offerings for many years now, really since the family of George Garrett presented us with an amazing suitcase of his work and his documents. George Garrett was a working class activist, trade unionist, writer and seafarer. And from the model developed on the Garrett project, we have continued to deliver creative heritage. So this evening, we're going to shine a spotlight on two of WoW's subsequent creative heritage projects, the Great Water Race Riots project and the Liverpool 8 Archive project. But we are also sharing that spotlight with other fantastic local initiatives, the Liverpool Black History Research Group and Mandela's Liverpool Anti-Apartheid activists. And all of these projects promote history that are very rarely taught in schools. They add to our understanding of Liverpool, its position within the global and political and economic system. So not only are they adding to our understanding of local history, but they add to our understanding of world history as well. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the panel this evening. Joining me are community historian Laurence Westgaph, Emy Onuora, who's led on a number of WoW's heritage projects, and he's the co-author of Great Water Race Riots. Sonia Bassey, community activist and chair of Mandela 8. Stephen Enzi, senior detached youth worker and Mandela 8 ambassador, and also community activist. Welcome everybody this evening. So I'm going to begin. Oh, can I just remind, before we do begin, remind our Facebook audience that if you want to get involved in this discussion and this debate, we're very happy and we'd love to hear from you. So if, in the Facebook comment section, if you type any comments you've got or questions, they'll be fed through to me and through to our panel. So once again, welcome everybody. And I'm going to invite you all, or all of us, to give a brief summary of your heritage project. And I'm kind of going to do it in a chronological order of the way that the areas that the project, the historic areas that the projects focus on. So I'm going to go over to you first, Laurence, to talk about the Liverpool Research Group.
Hi, Maddie. Hello, all the listeners. The Liverpool Black History Research Group was established about 2 years ago to investigate the history of Black people in Liverpool and the surrounding region. We've been engaging in a number of projects, but we are looking primarily at the moment at institutions with connections to slavery who have not necessarily done the research themselves and don't know about their origins. So this year, we've just unveiled a database looking at the origins of Liverpool University, the first and original red brick university, and its origins, where it comes from, how it was developed, etc. The group's made up of local people and also people from a little further afield who've got a genuine history in looking into the history of Black people and their achievements in Liverpool, but also much more widely how Black people have contributed in many different ways, whether here or abroad, to the developments of Liverpool. So obviously some of that will focus on the slave trade and the slave economy and how people of African descent, particularly in the Americas and in West Africa, helped to shape Liverpool in a number of different ways. We've been very successful in these last couple of years, and we've now gone on to establish the Liverpool Enslaved Memorial Project, which is to highlight a hidden history, really. A lot of people are of the opinion that no enslaved people came to Liverpool. So one of the avenues that we're researching is the Black presence in Liverpool and how it develops from the slave trade period onwards. And because people are unaware of this long Black presence in the city, we feel it's about time that the enslaved people who lived, died and were buried in Liverpool were memorialised. At the time of their death, because they were chattel, many of them never received a proper burial. They certainly, a number of them weren't actually even buried with their names, gifted names as they were. So one of the projects we've kind of moved on from is to raise awareness of that through a memorial. And we started a fundraiser in the summer, just after the Colston Statue came down, and within 2 weeks we'd raised about £35,000 in order to enable us to establish the memorial. So that's kind of what we're working on at the moment.
Brilliant, amazing, and amazing achievements, amazing amount raised as well, incredible. Okay, I'll come back to you with some specific questions, as I will for everyone, but now over to Emy Onuora to say, to give a brief outline of the Great Water Race Riots project.
Hello, thanks, Mad. Well, the Great Water Race Riots project emerged out of the finding of a series of letters that were found by a community activist who approached WoW with these letters. And the letters are from the period of 1919, during which a number of men of West Indian and African heritage were stranded in Liverpool, destitute. And there's a series of letters from them to the mayor of Liverpool asking for support and help to relieve them of poverty and hardship. And what also emerged out of the period of time, was that these letters took place. These letters were written around about the time of the 1919 race riots in Liverpool, and so as a result of so from these letters emerged a number of kind of themes around which a community-based projects were delivered. So obviously lots of people were interested in the letters as well. They were of great historic significance. The detail, the amounts of hardship and the treatments with which these men who had supported the British war effort had been, had suffered, and their representations to the mayor largely fell on pretty much deaf ears. So even those letters are all of great historical significance. But what also emerged out of that was a number of other strands to that particular project. One of them was the bit I was mostly involved in was around the development of a history course, which tried to place the letters, the First World War, the race riots within their kind of broader historical and social context. So it was looking at, the history of Liverpool's emergence as from a fishing village to the main, the gateway to empire. It looked at the history of the Black community, how it emerged, and one of its kind of key themes and key features of it. So that also brought lots of interest from community people who wanted to know more about it. Some people knew a little bit about the rights. Some people didn't know anything about it at all, and were really interested in finding out more about the rights themselves. In addition to that, we had a community artist who came in and made a series of black poppies there to commemorate the contribution of black servicemen and women who made a massive contribution to the First World War effort and were pivotal in ensuring that Britain and its allies emerged victorious from that. And there's a massive contribution that they made, and that people generally and the general public aren't necessarily aware of. And also, a couple of other kind of key features that emerged from that: a mapping exercise, a mapping of the residencies of those people who featured in the letters, and also, some of the participants then went on to develop the 1919 Race Riots walking tour, and that's been a massive legacy from the whole project itself. So there are a number of kind of features of the project that involved community. The important thing about, well, one of the important things about decolonizing curriculum is that we tend to think of it as just being something we do in schools or also universities, but here's an opportunity to actually involve communities in how the curriculum might be decolonized, and add in to not only Liverpool's history, not only Black history, but kind of history more generally.
Lovely, lovely. Thanks, Emy. And now I'm going to go over to Stephen Enzi to give us a bit of a background to Mandela Rate and its formation.
Hi, Maddie. Hi, everyone. Sonia's here as well, so she'll speak as well about Mandela Rate. After the passing of Nelson Mandela Rate some years back, as everyone remembers from the community, that community activists, young and old, kind of came together to say that they wanted to do something after watching the funeral at a building which is called the Cumbernamarty Centre. A lot of people in the community had dressed up Prince's Avenue with South African flags and remember the days of activism and the things that Nelson Mandela stood for. And it brought a lot of people together. And when we came back from Prince's Park Gates, a lot of people were having a discussion about, having some kind of long and lasting legacy to Nelson Mandela here in Liverpool. And there was loads of different ideas banded about, and from that, basically, an idea came about. So really, it started out saying, so, well, can we say, let's have a statue on Prince's Avenue, where the old statue that was removed years ago, let's put a statue up there. That's what people were thinking at the time. But of course, that whole idea, after the Facebook page was set up, started to develop and started to take legs. More people got involved. And it then became a real serious discussion. And then it wasn't, it moved way on from that. Like I said, anyone who wants to know a lot more about that could be here all day. Just go to our website and you'll see all the information of like how it all kind of progressed to where we are now. As I said, but we are building a memorial for Nelson Mandela in Prince's Park. All the plans have been done, the artwork, the groundworks, the lake. Most of that stuff's kind of being done. We've been kind of being held up this year with COVID and stuff like that to get kind of the bridge in and stuff. But it's been a program that's been happening for years. Got a great board, got great support, a great steering group. We're working in collaboration with a lot of people to make this happen. And from that, of course, with the memorial, there's a bigger program, which is our educational program, which Sonia is going to talk more about that and the longevity of where Mandela Rate's going. Because when we created this whole idea from the beginning, like I say, this is something that's going to be passed on. The memorial will be built in Prince's Park. It'll be a beautiful, beautiful site on the island with a bridge going across it, but it's got a long and lasting legacy. So it isn't just about putting that there and saying, good, let's just go and visit that and walk on. It has a whole value to it that we knew from the beginning, which is education. And that's how we want the program to develop. And we have already been working with schools across Liverpool and across the region and with our Mandela 67 program. But again, when we talk about bringing education into schools, I think that's one of our main things that we want to do, and a big program that we're working on, because we are working very, very highly with a lot of schools and the education services to make sure that schools are all tied in to that island. And so that things, basically, if you look at the designs of it, it's an outdoor classroom, but it can be used in many other features as well, as a performance space, as a place for reflection, a place to go on your own. You know, when you read the inscriptions that are going to be there on the cylinders, which are limestone cylinders, which are also like seating areas, you know, it's a place of inspiration. You should go to that island, read some of the stuff that's there from some great people from around the world. Take time to reflect, come off there and gather your thoughts. So, like I say, that's when you can go there and do that. But again, from the children's point of view and young people, you know, we want schools heavily involved, and that's what one of our big programs that we're at the moment rolling out. And Sonia will talk more about that through what we're dealing with.
Thanks, Enzi. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Madeline. You're all right?
Take it away.
So yeah, I think Enzi's covered why we were set up quite nicely. And I think it's just important to note that it's critical, you know, as part of our future, that our heritage is recognised and that story is told by ourselves, most importantly. So our heritage lastly funded heritage programme is going to allow us to tell that story of our anti-apartheid activists, not only from Liverpool 8, but from the wider communities of Merseyside and beyond. And I think their support for the struggle that South Africa went through, and some of the connections to Liverpool, and some of the ways people risked their lives and, you know, put themselves on the front line to support a country that was so far away, need to be recognised, really. And the way Liverpool supported the Free Nelson Mandela campaign. I mean, I was brought up on these stories and being directly involved in them. So for me, it's important that we recognise that our communities have such a negative story told about them, particularly Liverpool 8. It's notoriously known for the riots, but nobody ever seems to tell the story of why those riots took place, and, you know, the really positive, strong success stories about activism in our communities. And how our elders, the giants whose shoulders we stand on, have fought for us to have a future and rights, and made us strong and resilient to the things that go on around us. So the story of their heritage is going to be told through our project, and we're already well underway with that. And then we've got the memorial, which Enzi's talked about, which is to teach young people in schools and communities about Black history and Black education. So thinking outside the box, we decided if we can't get into schools, we'll bring the schools to us, and we've created a memorial that will be an outdoor classroom. So that space is there to teach young people who can come on study visits, and it's already, before it's even been built, we're being asked to do study visits already for schools and university students. But the idea of the classroom is that it's used as a focal point, really, to teach people about our history, Black education, and to celebrate each other for your differences, not hate each other for them. So that's key to one of our fundamental cornerstones, really, of what we do. And then the links to the physical regeneration of our communities are critical as well, and embedding our heritage stories in places that we live. So Princes Avenue is a perfect example of how we've tried to work with communities and partners and stakeholders like our Friends of groups to make sure that the history of those communities and what we've done throughout our lifetimes is ingrained in the fabric of the places that we live. So it's critical to us, really, that those stories are told accurately, and that they're told by us, and that people recognise the value we bring to our communities. And our educational programme, which Enzi talked about before, the My 67 Minutes, is only the start, really. And we've already reached 237,000 young people annually with that programme across the city region. We have plans next year for it to become a national programme. So we think big. We've always thought big. That can be scary sometimes for people, but I think if you don't have big ambitions, you'll only ever have little plans.
True that.
Thanks very much, Sonia. And I'm going to talk now about WoW's most recent archive project, and there's real overlaps with the period that Sonia's just talked about, and I imagine there'll be real overlaps between the two projects once COVID allows us to get on and carry on with our work. But what we're working on currently, and Emy is working with me also on this, is the Liverpool 8 Archives project, which essentially is focusing on two collections, the Liverpool 8 Law Centre and the Larker Collection, Liverpool Anti-Racist and Community Arts Association. And they have been entrusted to us by the committee of Liverpool 8 Law Centre to archive that collection, working with community members to archive that collection, to order it, to digitise it, and to bring it back into public access. It's a massive job, and we're kind of halfway through it at the moment. I think a lot of our audience, and certainly everyone sitting here with me this evening, would agree that these organisations are hugely significant, not just in terms of the local Liverpool 8 community or even wider Liverpool community, but two of the most significant organisations in Black British post-war history, I would argue. The Law Centre, Sonia's talked about the uprisings. What the archive shows is a direct development of the Law Centre out of those uprisings which swept inner city areas across the UK. And it shows through the documents that are in there how 2 days into those uprisings, there was the development of the Liverpool 8, the Liverpool 8 Defence Committee. And it was from those community activists that, who came together really to protect the community, to monitor the police, to see what the courts were up to visit people in prison. Those same activists, only a year later, were able to open a fully fledged law centre, which was part of the National Law Centre network. Like other law centres, it was there to provide advocacy and advice on housing, employment, education. But due to its location and the historic problems, there was a lot of work around police harassment and police brutality also. So this amazing archive really documents all of that. And I'd say because of where it is located and the circumstances out of which it grew, it had a very particular identity. And Sonia's kind of talked about the activism in the area, and it's that activism, I would say, that gave it that very, very political identity and distinguished it, I'd say, from other law centres, because the activists were involved in a whole myriad of struggles. International connections were made. The anti-apartheid movement was a big, an important feature of the law centre. Immigration was a key focus. It details how Alan Gale, the campaigns manager, went over to Ethiopia to try and unite members of our local Somali community with their families during the Civil War. And MIA was formed, Merseyside Immigration Unit was formed and housed in the building. Black Sisters was housed in the building, a hugely important childcare and support project for women in the area. And as well as kind of representing the community, the Law Centre sought to empower the community with the access to law courses that were run there, and successful lawyers and people who work in that field have come out of the other side and gone on to achieve a lot. And also in terms of empowering the community, and letting people know what was happening, not just locally, but in the wider world. Sonia Bassey, Sonia's dad, created an incredible library, which was a resource for the whole of the community to come in and use, documenting struggles locally, nationally, and internationally. And so that's the Law Centre. The Law Archive, which is also absolutely massive. That was an arts organisation that was established to combat racism and promote Black art and artists. And their activities were quite big regional, national campaigns, down to very grassroots projects. So I would say that the archives, both sets of archives, really evidence a community that is looking outwards, that is fighting racism at the same time. And I'd say that, you know, these are fundamentally important because this part of history is really missing from mainstream archives, but also mainstream histories, if you like. So there we have it. There we have the range of projects, and there's obviously connections and crossovers between all four of them. So I just want to pose a general question, and whoever wants to jump in on this can. I mean, obviously, we're representing community archive projects. We are committed to the involvement of the community in this, but why do you think it's so important that communities are involved in restoring, in recording and disseminating their own heritage? What do you think the difference is? Why don't we just send it to the museum or the library? Or why do you think the community is so key to the development of these projects and the information that we're trying to get out there?
Maddie, can I come in?
Yeah, so Sonia and then Laurence.
Yeah. I think it's critical to knowing and telling the truth and accurate records of history. And I think the work that we're doing, all of us in communities, is engaging local activists and telling their stories and their involvement, really. There's a long history in Liverpool, in particular, of us being portrayed in the most negative way in the media. And I think if we don't tell our own stories, we get fake stories. We are vilified in the press and other forums. So it's crucial that we make sure that that information that's out there is accurate. And people in our communities doing that and telling those stories are a perfect example of how to get that right. I think that's why we told the story of the Detached riots 30 years on. It's our identity. We need to own it. And I think it's critical to us feeling a sense of belonging where we live and in society as a whole.
Thanks, Son. Laurence?
I think it's really important for communities to engage in telling their own stories, as Sonia says, for a number of reasons. I don't think academic historians are necessarily the best place to tell community histories. And two, and certainly in the case of the Black community, you know, we would think it very strange if the only people who wrote about women's history were men. If you go into academic spaces, it's white people telling Black people's histories, you know? And in many ways, I specialize in the slave trade. White academics are making a career off the back of telling these stories about how Black people were exploited. And in some ways, that doesn't really sit very well with me, this idea of, you know, these bodies were exploited when they were alive. And in many ways, they're being exploited today. So a lot of people are parachuted into our communities, take away this great treasure, which is our history, and then go on to have a career, when these are the perfect opportunities for us to inspire our own young people, particularly, to get engaged in telling their own stories, you know, both at a community level and where they would like to at an academic level. I think it's we really lose if we don't educate our own young people on how important it is that they tell their own stories.
Can I just add to that as well, please, Mads? I mean, just to echo what both Sonia and Laurence have said about the need for for Black people to tell their own stories and to give that particular perspective is important in its own right, for all the reasons that Laurence and Sonia have mentioned. But there's another aspect to it as well. If you look at the Great Water Race Riots project, one of the things that emerged out of that I kind of touched upon very briefly was the walking tour of the 1919 riots. Now, had we stuck and not involved the community, had we stuck the letters in the museum, then it would have been great for people to go and see. They would have seen the letters. But actually, what emerged out of that was a group of community people decided that actually what they wanted to do was to form a walking tour of the looking at all the key landmarks of the 1919 race riots, and that emerged not as a product of the it wasn't one of the outcomes of the project. It kind of grew organically from the project itself and was led by community people. And so what it does is, what a community-based initiative, historical initiative does, it does give opportunity for local community people to actually shape the way in which their stories are told and the way in which they're able to engage the general public with the stories, in this particular case, the 1919 riots, but in other stories as well. So it is really important that you get a very different perspective when you engage communities and Black people in their own stories.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? A few years ago, where I work at the Greenhouse Project, we run a project called Positive Images. And this project was based around going into schools. I was working with Curtis Watt. And what the project was about really was young people investigating their own history and their own family trees. And this was Black kids, this was all children from across the city. And they took home a family tree, and what they had to do was go and speak to the families about, well, who am I? So, you know, you'd have like little Bobby at 10 or little Sue at 10. They were going home and coming back with history about their families, about a little bit of a genealogical line. Then there was discussions, and then we would ask them to do some artwork around their heritage. And what the children all found out is that they were actually very, very much connected in a way in this city. And secondly is that they actually really dug down deep things that they never realized about themselves, even their own families. Their own families then started talking about their own heritages. And that actually was an amazing thing. You know, it was an amazing project to see. And that was working with children. I mean, I just echo what everyone said. You know, if you leave people to find out their own thing and let them do it within their own communities, one, you'd empower them, and then you dig down to the truth. Do you know what I mean? And like I say, you know, it's education. We want young people as well to get involved in these kind of things. So working with young people just in that project, and it was a really big, long project, you know, worked with nearly over 30, 40 schools and primary schools across the city, and had exhibitions. And if you've seen the exhibitions of what these children had brought up and their histories, you know, you'd had young children, Black children, who really and truly didn't know really and truly. All they knew was, yeah, I'm Black, and yeah, I'm from Liverpool, and yeah, my dad's from maybe here or from the West Indies. But when they dug down deeper, they found out so much about themselves. You know, that connection between them and their own families was actually even made stronger, we feel. And that wasn't just for Black kids either. That was for all children. So again, you know, when we're talking about getting things into the education system, you know, it's good for children to investigate themselves and actually investigate each other. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's essential. It's essential that it's done from people who are trying to find out about themselves and not parachuting in, like other people have said, other people to do that and go away and then write it for us, which is never actually written properly anyway.
Thanks, Stephen, and that just makes me kind of think about the opportunities as well offered by community archiving, the opportunity to kind of learn new skills. And I think it's important, not, you know, clearly with young people, and I know the Anti-Apartheid Activist Project is going to be training up young people as well in very practical skills. But I think it was the same for our projects where people are learning. I mean, me and you were learning, weren't we? I mean, we were learning new skills of archiving and preserving documents. So I think the kind of upskilling you know, let's bring it out into the community and not just it stays as a specialism within university departments. I'm going to just jump in with an audience question because it kind of links to what Enzi's just been saying. So I've got a point here that says, it's sad that young people often don't understand their history and what their ancestors experienced. When do you think parents and grandparents stopped relaying this, and what can be done to reinvest in parenting programs to re-engage parents to tell their story and their history?
Wow.
Okay, go on, Enzi, and then over to Laurence.
No, go on, Laurence.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, as part of the Liverpool Black History Research Group, we want to establish a parents and children's learning project. So parents and children come to learn together, because one of the issues is people don't talk much anymore, especially to do with the way social media is nowadays. So one of the ways we address that gap that the question posed is through doing that, is by having people learning together. The project that Stephen was involved in, I was one of the parents who's actually involved in that, and I thought that was a fantastic opportunity to help my child to understand just where he came from and how long his family had been here in Liverpool. He was fascinated with that, and he took part in the project. So I think that's a great way of learning, and I think we should be doing that outside of the formal classroom. Gives us more opportunities, and it'll help people come together and build community. Saturday schools sessions, Sunday weekend sessions, I think are a great way of kind of doing that.
Lovely. Anybody else want to add to that? Son?
I think our Roots and Wings programme that we piloted with young people showed that it's critical that parents are involved in their young child's lives. We insisted that parents brought them to the sessions and came and collected them. We also got them involved in doing their homework activity and evidencing what they were doing during lockdown. And I truly believe that's why the programme was so successful, and why all of those kids have come out of the programme with AQA qualifications, often while most of them were in a pupil referral unit or on the edge of exclusion. And some of them have gone back into mainstream school, and the others have certainly improved their education and their relationships with their parents on the back of being involved in that. So it is critical that they get involved. I couldn't tell you when parents stopped engaging in their children's lives in that way and being part of that family unit, teaching them about their heritage and stuff like that. Life's hard, isn't it? And, you know, we have so many things to deal with in life these days. Often we forget about those closest to us and those who need us most, because we're all trying to earn a living and trying to do too many things at once. So I do think, though, that, you know, we do need more programmes and activities that involve parents in their young children's lives.
Lovely. And Jackie Gill would agree with you. She said Mum did a similar project in Mr. John's pool room by the Freetown years ago, and she said exactly what Enzi's saying now, and Jackie thinks we need something like this again. So I'm going to kind of come on to some individual questions now, if that's okay. So, Laurence, I want to start with you and say congratulations on your fairly recent appointment as historian in residence at NML. And I want to ask you, do you think this is an indication that big institutions are ready to make a change? You know, you talked about Liverpool University, and finally they have come out and said, yes, we did have we were rooted in the slave trade. So do you think statements like that, your appointment, do you think the big institutions are ready to make a big change? And will your appointment have a national impact, do you think?
I'll start with your second question first, as regards and having a national impact. It's too early to say, to be honest. I'm very much wary of the fact that the whole BLM thing may be a fad. and I might seem like a skeptic, but I'm very worried about that. So maybe if you ask me that question again in a year, I'll be able to give you a more definitive answer. In relation to the fact that that NML have done that, National Museums Liverpool, I can only applaud them for doing so. I think that's because they've got some very radical trustees, or certainly one very radical trustee, Michelle Charters, who's really pushed this idea that, no, this is something that we need to be doing. We need to be investigating the origins of our collections, etc. And it's really off the back of that, as well as other people in NML who will remain nameless, who've really decided, well, yeah, this may be a time for us to employ a historian in residence who can kind of go through, and I don't like the term decolonize, but can certainly go and start having a look at our collections and acknowledging how and why we acquired them, when and how we did. So I applaud it. But again, as regards it being having a national impact, or even a local impact, time will tell.
Thanks, Laurence. And Emy, my question for you, as we are approaching Remembrance Sunday, is whether you think the contribution of Blacks now being beginning to be properly acknowledged. As you and I know, they weren't acknowledged at the time of, certainly, of the First World War, not invited to the victory parade. How much progress do you think there's been since then, and do you think things are changing in that respect?
I think there's been actually minimal progress made in that regard. Actually, I think it's still the case that there's a lack of recognition or understanding that actually, let's even take just the Second World War, that actually West Indian pilots were involved in the war effort, and that there were servicemen from all over Britain's colonies. I think there's just a general lack of understanding that was the case, and a general, like, we don't hear about it in if you do the First World War in history in school, that's omitted from the story of the First World War. You might have, the stories of the Somme and Passchendaele and Ypres and Flanders Fields and so on, but actually the fact that there were 1.5 million Indians, 75,000 West Africans and West Indians who served, the contribution of the colonies, West Indian colonies, was about £2 million in cash and goods, 200 million or similar amounts from India as well. All of these stories, which actually that contribution is critical to the war effort. All of those contributions are really critical, but yet there's no recognition. Those things are systematically omitted from that kind of narrative. So I don't think much progress has been made at all in that regard. I mean, even when it was, I just remember when I was growing up and you watch British films about the world, about the Second World War, for example, the Dam Busters or The Great Escape. I think it's only Escape to Victory and The Dirty Dozen which had any black people featured at all in the Second World War. So our contribution, our massive contribution, and of the colonies in particular, to the winning of the wars, of both world wars, has just been omitted, and I don't see that changing very quickly in the near future, especially with some of those older veterans now. Their stories not necessarily being captured. Some are being captured, but not all of them are being captured. And I think it's a real shame that that contribution's not being recognised. It's a shame that maybe in 20, 30 years, when they're no longer with us, that we might be able to get some recognition, unless somebody decides to fight for them.
Thanks, thank you. I mean, we've tried to do our bit, and David Olusoga supported us, didn't he? We now do have the plaque down by on the Queen's Dock in memory of Charles. But I think our next step is we need a street sign directing people to the plaque. We need a
Yeah.
campaign around that because it's a little bit hidden away. Okay, Sonia, coming over to you and thinking about the stories of anti-apartheid activism that you're going to be, Mandela Rate's going to be collecting. One of the standout stories has surely got to be what happened when Zola Bud came here to Liverpool. Now, bear in mind, some of our younger audience may not even know who Zola Bud is. So do you want to tell us what happened at that time?
Okay, well, most people of my age will know Zola Bud as the white South African runner who used to run barefoot, and that was what she was most famous for till she came to the UK. And she was given British citizenship within 10 days, and it was so controversial because there was a sporting ban on South Africa because of apartheid and the way it was treating its black constituents. And getting this passport meant she was able to represent the UK in the Olympics, and the UK saw her as their great hope for the Olympics in Los Angeles. So this caused outrage to anti-apartheid campaigners across the whole of the UK, and there were protests all over the UK. But one of the probably most recognisable ones that we remember is when she came to take part in a cross-country event, and the Liverpool Against Apartheid group, the Liverpool 8 Against Apartheid group, demonstrated against her running in this cross-country event, and it was in Arrow Park in Birkenhead. And my dad was one of the protesters, and he went out on the track and prevented her from running. He was arrested, he was charged, he was racially abused, he was tried in Wallasey magistrates, so he was already disadvantaged by the court he was tried in, and he was convicted. He appealed, and his conviction was later quashed by Liverpool Crown Court along with 2 other people. She was remembered by me, although many people remember her for being barefoot and representing the UK, for a lack of principles, really, at a time when her country was at the height of its apartheid regime. And of all the things that she could have done, she allowed herself to be passported into, Olympics and taken part in athletics at a time when really everybody should have been supporting the anti-apartheid regime, but because her granddad was from the UK, she was fast-tracked through.
Yeah.
And so essentially, your dad prevented Zola Bud from running when she came here to Liverpool. And when Maria tells the story, she said that there was a young person from the area, not part of the race, just happened to be running alongside, and she actually beat her. So I mean, there are some.
But there were, I think it's important that as well, because there were black South African athletes who were far more accomplished than Zola Bud, and they weren't allowed to compete. And actually, if they'd have applied for a passport, it probably would have taken 2 years for it to be approved. So I think it was an important note to make. And Andy actually probably has a story about that event because he was there. I was banned from going to all these activities, marches, events, because my dad didn't want me to get in trouble. So I became the community artist for all these activities, did all the banners and the placards and posters, but I wasn't allowed to go. So Andy will probably tell you firsthand what that was like.
Yeah.
I mean, I have got a question for you as well, but if you want to supplement Sonia's story, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, the thing is just 2 things, right? It also showed you the cahoots that South Africa was in with the UK at the time, and how that was fast tracked. You know what I mean? And how Zola Bud was allowed to run for England, like. And I remember we went to that event and we got shipped over in minibuses, and we were young activists at the time, and it was well documented what was going on with Zola Bud. So we all went over there. It was a cold, muddy day for what I can remember. I think it was a Sunday morning actually, and it was a cross-country run. And I just remember we all got into place. Some of the elders were telling us, yeah, look, make sure we all get in this position. And then as they turned around this corner, yeah, I remember Solly jumping out. And then there was a big scuffle, and then there was, you know, like, as you can imagine, there was a big scuffle, and the race kind of got partly stopped. But I remember that day clearly, because again, these were the things that we were doing at the time, especially at the time. I think it was 84, so I was about 18, 19, something like that. You know, we were young activists, and we were out there going to demos, marches, anything that was out there, we were at them. Do you know what I mean? You know, as young men from the area, like, and so yeah, that sticks out, that whole story of Zola Budd.
But it was mission accomplished, because she didn't get to compete in the trials.
No,
And so
she didn't finish that
qualify.
race either. She didn't finish that race either, actually.
No, and obviously what happened with Zola Budd is documented in the archive. Is, you know, there's newspaper reports in the L8 archive, but it's kind of hearing these first-hand stories, which really adds to it and really highlights the importance, as Sonia said and Enzi said, of getting these stories, getting them down while we can. So just to talk a bit more about the Law Centre, Stephen, I know because I've interviewed you about when I've been doing the work around the Law Centre, it was a key feature of your life. And I think you've said, you know, it really, you know, was crucial for how your life turned out, in fact. So can you tell us personally what impact the Law Centre had for you?
Well, I wrote 3 words down here, and the 3 words were activism, defence, and mentors. And it really, they're kind of all in no one order, really. I mean, I really got involved from afar, looking at the Law Centre from being at the Charles Wotton Centre when I was younger. And as you were talking before, the re-emergence of the L8 Defence Committee, you know, I was 16 I was around the riots and all the rest of it. I remember how the L8 Defence Committee came about and how they grew into the Law Centre. And then at that time, there was a lot of, you know, problems. I was forever getting arrested. I think everyone that I knew around my age was forever getting arrested. And, we were using, like, say, I think the first time I used a solicitor in town, and that never really worked out well. And then I was kind of directed, if I remember rightly, even towards the Law Centre from someone. It was actually, it might have been someone from the South Liverpool personnel. I think it was someone like Cookie. And then, anyway, goes to the Law Centre, and they spoke to me about getting solicitors and stuff like that. Then I started getting arrested again, and then I needed to get bailed out, and I had no one to bail me out. It's a true story. And Liverpool 8 Law Centre sent someone down to get me bailed out. I think it was Alan Gale at the time. So he bailed me out. I think it was about a week later, and I got arrested again. And I remember, you know, I'm not doing nothing wrong here to get arrested. This was just a sign of the times in 81, 82. You know, you walk down the street, you were getting arrested for something stupid. You get what I'm saying? I remember then it was like Maria O'Reilly came and bailed me out. And then I remember Father Austin was sent by the Law Centre to not just bail me out, but bail loads of people out. So in a way, the Law Centre became somewhere that was helping to defend us, but also, right, understood our plight, because, you know, it wasn't that we were criminals or nothing like that, you know, at the time. It wasn't that what it was about, as everyone remembers. It was just the oppression and the problems that we were facing just moving around in our own area. And this was all, of course, remember, on the back end of the 81 riots. So, you know, for the years after that, if people think, oh, everything calmed down, it never. It was, you know, there was a lot of problems in our community still with the police. And so from defence, that's where I started to become more active and got an understanding of activism and what they were kind of other things that were going on in other groups that were based around the Law Centre. And that's, again, you know, when I say the word mentors, because I was listening to a lot of older, wiser people than myself who would educate me and give me certain books to read and things to have a different understanding on a perspective of things and things I didn't know. You know, the most I knew about Black history when I left school at 16 was because I watched Roots on TV. And when I watched that at 16, I was actually 15. That blew my damn mind. And when I got out at 16, because I was in a boarding school at the time, and when I got back out onto the streets, I'll be quite honest with you, I was a bit all over the place, especially after watching Roots within that year. And it was actually people in the Law Centre who kind of, some of the elders in there who I actually believe over a period of time calmed me down. When I say calm me down, they kind of gave me a direction and took the anger out and said, look, you need to understand, start reading certain books, educated me, give me a different kind of way of thinking, a different way and a different path. And still to this day, some of the people who were some of the elders who are still, you know, left from the law centre, who are still with us, you know, I still see them as highly in regard. And if I need advice, I'll still go to them to this day for that advice. So the law centre has been very instrumental right through my years. And like I said, there's, you know, we were up for a big trial years ago where it was the first trial where black barristers were brought into Liverpool, and it was the law centre that sorted that all out. You know, it was a serious charge when they brought violent disorder in, and as we know, violent disorder time when they brought that charge in, it was for communities like ours. They tested it big time in Liverpool and started doing everyone for violent disorder. Big group of us were done for violent disorder, and the law centre looked at all the cases that were going on around and said, we need defending, but we can't be getting defended by these barristers in Liverpool and from just shipped in whoever they are, just because basically you knew you were going to jail. So, you know, they came and devised a plan to go and bring barristers from London, first black barristers to defend anyone in Liverpool for what I heard at the time. And my barrister at the time was Peter Herbert. And some of you have heard he's gone on to do great things, but it just shook up the whole system. It really did. I can't tell you how going to a courthouse and being defended by a black barrister, not just me, there was 3 black barristers in the court, and against one of the most notorious judges at the time, Judge Wickham. You know, it was like, we believed even before then we were going to jail, even with these barristers, because usually that was what happened. Do you know what I mean? You know, many people went to jail for all kinds of things that they never done or were accused of, or at the time, one of the biggest things that the police were doing, there was plants and all other kind of things. But these barristers defended us and they got us off. And I will never forget that, because we all got found not guilty. Judge Wickham got reported to the Chief Lord Justice, and the prosecutor Locke was made to retire. You know, there was a lot of kickback after that trial. Do you know what I mean? And it was, to me, it was a landmark thing as well for the law centre at the time, because, you know, honestly, the celebrations that went on after that, it was like, it wasn't just that we'd achieved something. As a community, we'd achieved something, because we felt now we could actually have some kind of defence, you know. So again, the law centre means many, I could go on and on, but it means a lot to me in the path and the journey that I ended up taking. And like I said, if it wasn't for that intervention at that time, I don't think it would have been the same story as where I am now. So can I say that down?
Thanks, Enz. And you mentioned elders in and around the law centre, and Esther Mufti's tuning in as we speak, and she just wants to say that she was there at the Zola Bud race, and she wants to say Solly never touched Zola. He just jumped in their way. Policemen on horses charged us, but Solly did stop her race. So there we have a first-hand account of what happened on that day. Okay, I want to kind of generalise. I mean, you know, your personal perspectives are really fascinating, but I want to generalise out a little bit, because we're rapidly running out of time, actually. But you know, a lot of since the Black Lives Matter protests and the image of Colston being dragged down and pushed into the river, there's been a huge amount of discussion and debate about iconography, symbols of heritage. And so I want to ask, and I'm throwing it out to all of you, really, whoever wants to jump in first. How did you feel when you saw the Colston statue being torn down by protesters? And what do you think should happen in the city with similar kind of iconography, or town hall, for example, with its African heads? What should happen with other statues? And street names has been a big local discussion. So whoever wants to jump in first.
I felt great myself when I watched it myself, to quite honest with you. I have to admit it. I was fascinated. I was like, wow, really? Do you know what I mean? When I seen, and also the crowd, you know, it was like, I mean, there was a lot going on at the time, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean? To take in, but then to see that image was, I'll be honest with you, I thought it was great. Do you know what I mean? Of course, reflecting on it, you know what I mean? And I know now that they're saying that they're going to stick it in a museum. And maybe they should have done that in the beginning, because, you know, there was people out there campaigning for that to happen, to remove it naturally and put it somewhere. But again, there's going to be loads of debate over whether you should leave statues up or take them down. Do you know what I mean? My view was, it was great to see, but I do also understand the flip side of that, where people are saying, well, you know, leave some kind of reference there and talk about who they really were. Do you know what I mean? So that you can see them visibly standing there. Again, it's one of them with me. You know what I mean? I've heard a lot of the discussions on it about, you know, changing the names of like what they're about and who they are and leaving them in place. And I do understand that if you take them all away, then you wipe out history as well. So should they be visible? So, and it's a long debate, and I've heard many discussions in Liverpool about it, and about, you know, renaming street names and all the rest of it. I think that should be happening, most definitely. I don't see why not. And would it be to now, let's say, remove statues in Liverpool, because we've still got a few left round here, haven't we, in Liverpool? Should we remove them? Well, no, I don't see that's going to make any difference right now at this time. I think there's a lot of people out there, Laurence, a lot of other people who've got a lot of ideas around what we should be doing, who've got probably stronger ideas than me that would work. Do you know what I mean? You know, so again, like I say, I thought it was great actually seeing it come down.
I mean, I totally agree with you, to be honest. I am one for not taking down street names, but contextualizing so that the history is still there and people understand the terrible past behind the name, if you like. But that moment, you know, I did cheer when you know, people took matters into their own hands, people who've been shouting about that statue for a long time in the prominent place, and no contextualization at all. I was really inspired by it when that statue came down.
Can I add a bit? Can I add a bit just before Laurence does, because I know Laurence is kind of Laurence probably knows more about this than any of us. About this issue, and has looked at this issue more than any of us, but mine's just a kind of anecdotal thing I wanted to add. And similar to Enns and Madeline, I felt kind of inspired by the toppling of the statue. Even more so, my niece is from Bristol and was involved in the demonstration where the statue was toppled. And I'm just kind of thinking about when she was telling me about how proud she was of herself. And bear in mind, the toppling of the statue wasn't just something that was a kind of a random event, a piece of vandalism that emerged out of you know, some kind of out of a demonstration. This had been a long-standing campaign by activists in Bristol to change that, and she'd been part of the debate and the discussion around it. And so for her, when the statue was toppled, it was kind of a real sense of pride that she had, that and that she was involved in this kind of movement to topple the statue. And as Madeline says, you know, it's not about as some people have described it as whitewashing history. It's about contextualizing history. It's about adding to what we understand, to our understanding of history, rather than denying something something took place. And that statue would only have been toppled, would never have been toppled, if the demands to contextualize history had actually been answered. Yeah, been listened to. Definitely.
Thanks, Laurence.
See, this is why I think it's really important that this moment took place from a symbolic perspective. So what do I mean? So as Emy said, if people had taken the opportunity to recontextualize, to reinterpret this monument many years ago, that would have never happened. That's quite, for me, that kind of says something about how we need to discuss history more openly and more honestly, particularly in the history of this country. We have a very definite idea of what our national story is. And the Colston Statue kind of embodies that. So in this country, we're very happy to talk about events that take place that put us in a good light, or even things that are just quite interesting, but don't have much resonance through history. So for example, why do we spend so much time talking about the Tudors, for example, and yet nothing about the 18th century slavery, the development of the British Empire. Why do we talk about or celebrate the fact that Britain was at the centre of the Industrial Revolution without talking about how the goods that were refined and processed in mills in and around Manchester, how they were acquired?
That's right.
You know, we talk about the Industrial Revolution without talking about the people who picked the products that were made into the goods that made this country so wealthy. We celebrate the role that we played in the development of the railway, the second industrial revolution, the revolution around transport, without talking about where the wealth came from, when we know that wealth came directly from plantations and compensation that was paid to owners of enslaved people. So I think the statues really embody that history. They give us an opportunity. It's certainly in my role as a tour guide for 25 years, I use these statues as a way of subverting that national story. So when I look at these people who put on pedestals, I use them to tell another side to their story. So for example, in St. John's Gardens, we've got Arthur Bower Forward, who's seen as one of the great late 19th century philanthropic figures in Liverpool. But people don't talk about the fact that he made his money through buying and selling slave-produced cotton. And then during the American Civil War, he's what we would call today a gun runner, but what they euphemistically called a blockade runner, you know, selling goods to the Confederates during the American Civil War. So I see these statues as a way of being able to tell those stories outside of the classroom. For me, the public realm is the best classroom. I can engage with a totally different demographic, as Stephen and Sonia will be able to attest to, when I take people out into the public realm. So kids who will turn off in a lecture theatre or in a classroom when we're just reading about these subjects become so interested when you take them to places of memory and show them these sites and these monuments to these individuals who, in many ways, I consider them to be a part of a rogues gallery. So although they were put up during the Victorian and Edwardian period to kind of celebrate these individuals, nowadays we don't really do statues. But for me, they're a perfect opportunity or a perfect prop to teach people about this other side of the national story, the local story for Liverpool, and then this national story, which is the history of Britain, which, because of our involvement in empire, because let's be honest, you know, Britain doesn't really have much in the way of natural resources. We're only the 6th largest economy because we had the largest empire in history, and we kind of raped those countries in order to enrich this country. But that's not something that we're told in, you know, when you learn history in the classroom. And I think that having the tours and being able to go out into the street and having people engage with these places that they wouldn't necessarily engage with just walking around is a perfect opportunity to tell this much wider story. I'll leave it at that.
I do think the toppling of that statue, as the same with the Huskisson statue in Princess Avenue, it was the right thing to do at the right time. You know, people are pushed to the limits, and they respond when they feel they've got no other choice. But I completely agree with Laurence in terms of their educational value and you know, the value of the outdoor classroom, and our streets paved as a classroom, isn't it, with the history of slavery.
And Laurence, you've been working quite closely with talking to City Council about getting our street names contextualised. I think, you know, knowing that was already going on, when there was talk about our street names being changed after the Colston Statue come down, it's like, well, no, what is that all about? Because we've already had an agreement that we're going to contextualise them. Where are we in that? How soon is that going to happen, do you think?
Well, we've set up a panel, so we're having discussions with the council. I think COVID has kind of gotten in the way of that, so there's been a lot of delays, but the council say they're committed to doing this. So they've already, we've listed 20 names, 10 of which will be memorialised in the first trench, and then hopefully we can go and do this more generally over time. So it's going ahead, but as with everything during this crazy, unprecedented time, there's no real time frame for when it will be done. Probably the best thing that's come out of that is the commitment that the great contributions of Eric Lynch, one of our older activists who's now in his late 80s, the memorial plaque will be named in his honour, because obviously he was so instrumental in starting up the slavery trade walks back in the 1980s. I think. Lovely,
lovely. And just while we're talking about naming things in people's honour, I should just say that a section, a very large section, the resource library part of the Liverpool 8 archives. It has been named after Sonia's dad, Solomon Bassey, and it will be available. The whole thing will be available for public access as soon as we can get back lockdowns over and we can do the work. One final question, because time's running out. In terms of young activists today, the Black Lives Matter movement, what lessons from your particular period of history that your project is focusing on, what lessons can be learned from history go forward today?
I think for me, the most notable thing is they're all about oppression. Every one of the stories that we've told has been about oppression or being marginalised or left out of history. Our people fighting for justice. So they're all similar in many ways. And I think we have to know that these battles that people have fought weren't fought alone. We all have a responsibility, black or white, to do the right thing. And unite in the ongoing fight against racism and xenophobia that's just increasing and unfolding in this country.
Thank you, Son. Emy?
I think Laurence was first. Go on, Laurence.
Sorry, Emy.
No, go on.
For me, in regards to my particular project, and for young people, I think it's really important to understand the contributions that Black people have made to the development of this country. When I take young people around, I'm very aware that a lot of people of colour don't feel that their history is told or their contribution to British society. We know all this terrible stuff around, immigrants coming to steal our jobs, etc., etc. But Black people, whether here or in the former colonies, have contributed as much as any other group to the development, not only of Liverpool, but of this country. And I think that that's what I try and really instill in young people, is don't ever feel like you don't belong here, because people from the background that you hail from, whether that can be in colonies in West Africa or colonies in the Americas, you've contributed as much as any other group. In terms of Black people as well, it's about telling our forgotten stories. How many people know that a Black man born in Liverpool in 1815 was probably the central figure in the democratisation of the House of Keys on the Isle of Man? If you go to the Manx Museum in Douglas, you'll see a bust of a Black Scouser, a man who's forgotten in his own hometown, but is memorialised in his adopted town of Douglas. How many people know that one of the greatest boxers of the 19th century, probably the greatest boxer of the 19th century, is buried here in Liverpool? There's so many of these stories. In last year, Jeremy Corbyn tweeted out how the first Black MPs were elected to Parliament in 1987. So I had to retweet them back, say, hold on, Jerry, you're out by about 175 years. There's a Black man whose family were based in Liverpool, who represented Stafford in 1812. So these are the stories that our young people need to understand, to know that they've contributed as much as any other group to the development of this city and to Britain in general.
Yeah, can I just come in on that as well? Yeah, I think that's well summed up before. It's like, once you start telling people of their successes and about Black people's successes and, things about what they've done and what they've achieved, not in just this country, around the world, you know what I mean? You start putting Black people, we raise ourselves up, because at the moment, I've never gone, it was a long time since I went to school, but I don't see school actually changing in a lot of ways, actually. Do you know what I mean? And the ways kids are being taught about who they are or how they're being empowered at all, So my whole thing is make sure that young people are empowered with education, make sure that they find out who they are. And to be proud of that as well. But like I said, what we seem to always get is about our oppressions. Yeah, we've had loads of oppressions and we still go through oppressions, but we do need to also speak about our successes and about the great people that have come from centuries before us. We need to put ourselves properly on the map, because I think sometimes it's like we kind of just like trying to push our way in and say, well, we've done this, and we've done that. We've done a lot of great things, and all that history seems to be like the historians here is lost. I just want to see all that history all the time re-brought up to the fore. It's like I watched a program recently, again going back to the Second World War, and where the money really came from to finance that war. Never mind just the amount of soldiers that we don't hear about and who fought in the war from the colonies, but the amount of wealth and money that was stripped out of those countries just to finance this country having a war. So when I hear that story about, oh, we won the Great War, you'd have to ask the question, who won the war?
Thanks, and Emy.
I mean, you know, two issues, I suppose. On first of all, on Black Lives Matter, that whole movement, in a time where, you know, we were in the middle of that kind of pandemic, it just gave me such pride, I suppose, that that our young people in particular were taken up, you know, we're taken to the streets and we're taking up the baton, and fighting their own battles that their generation need to fight, and that made me really proud. My daughters invited me and their mum to the first. I came home from work and my daughter said, "We're going on a demonstration about Black Lives Matter, Dad. Would you like to come with me? Would you like to come with us?" It was just, and I felt really proud that they'd asked us to kind of participate in this kind of youth event. And so it just made me really proud of not just them, obviously, but the whole generation of young people. I mean, our young people are quite often, lots of people say about them, they're too comfortable. They're always fixated with social media. They love, they're only interested in Snapchat, and they're too comfortable. They get everything. They're only interested in fashion and so on and so forth. But actually, what this demonstrates is actually the conditions that every generation throws up means that a generation has to kind of struggle. And that's one of the things that history tells us as well, quite often, that if you get a certain set of conditions, particularly when you have an economic recession, when you have power concentrated in the hands of too few people, when people's voices are unheard, there's a kind of historical process that always leads to the same kind of outcomes where people are kind of forced to struggle. And I just think that's why I kind of love history on one hand, because it's you know, it gives us in a sense a blueprint about the conditions in which we live in. But I suppose the big question is the big question for me about the Black Lives Matter movement is really about, it's been fantastic. I mean, you think about, you know, in terms of its reach, even if you just think of the states, in terms of its reach, 52 demonstrations in 52 states, in places like Portland and other areas, they're still demonstrating from the day George Floyd was murdered. And, you know, the media don't really want us to know about that at the moment. So they're still going on. The demonstrations across the world that are taking place, in terms of its reach, it's the biggest, you know, kind of civil rights event, you know, in history. However, the next thing is, you know, the question is, what next? How is it sustained? What do we do next? And they're the kind of still the big questions for me. But in general, immensely proud of that generation of people who've been prepared to kind of struggle.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was a demonstration where I've never seen so many young people and felt like I'm, you know, our age group were in the minority, and that was just lovely to see. But for me, I'm going to tell you what I find inspiring from the period that is covered by the Liverpool 8 archive. When I look at that, the impression that I've got is that the fight against racism, the fight for racial equality, was a very multicultural and class-based fight. It went across the various communities. Everybody was involved, and they were involved together. And I see that reflected in the Black Lives Matter movement. And you know, this is after people have tried to, or the powers that be have tried to divide us with, you know, talk of ethnicities and funding being tied to ethnicities. The LA Law Centre was before that, and this Black Lives Matter is now after that. And I hope that that unity really is that we managed to keep that together going forward, because what next, that is a crucial element for me. So on that note, I think I am going to have to draw this fascinating conversation to a close. There's been some great comments on the chat, but I haven't had time to relay them all back. They've not so much questions, but people are chatting and having important discussions there on Facebook. You three be able to, you four will be able to catch up by looking at the event, which will remain up on Facebook, as with all of our Black History Month events so far. So I just say thank you to Laurence, to Emy, to Sonia, to Stephen. Huge thanks. And actually, thank you. Sonia talked about the giants whose shoulders we stand on. Thank you who have passed, and many are still with us, and some of them joining us on the chat this evening. So to those long-standing activists. Okay, so all that remains for me to do now is to just tell you what is next up for Black History Month. On Thursday, we've got an event featuring Stephen Small, who's joining us from Berkeley, California. He's going to be talking about the public health crisis then and now. In the morning, tomorrow morning, we've got story time with Patience Agbabi, who's a fantastic poet. We've got 3 story time events for the young ones coming up during Black History Month. Next week, we've got Majid, former mayor of Sheffield, and Sophie Williams, who's going to be talking about how to be an anti-racist ally. The Goddess Project are going to be joining us, and we will finish off with the celebration of our book launch, coming out of our Windrush Music Project, and we're going to hear from readings from those participants, but we are also going to be hearing from musician and musical expert Michael Riley. We're very delighted that Michael Riley of Steel Pulse will be joining us for our final Black History Month event. So all that remains for me to say is everybody who's joined us tonight, thank you very much, and thank you to our funders, Liverpool Mayor's Office. Thank you to Culture Liverpool for the ongoing support, and thank you to the Arts Council as well. I'm Madeline Heneghan. This event's been brought to you by Writing on the Wall. Have a good evening, everybody.